Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of At last, it's time for me to review the extreme horror novel Playground by Aron Beauregard, which I say finally because technically I had read this book last winter when I was dead dog sick, and because of me being so far behind on a lot of other things, I had to catch up with those before I could move on. Then, when I finally started recording this, we had an awful storm that came through that caused us to lose lights for the better part of a week. And when we finally regained electricity, my phone decided to crap out on me, where in turn I had lost everything I had recorded up to that outage. So, as you can imagine, I was pretty damn pissed, but luckily, after I went and just screamed at the trees and screamed at the air, I finally got my thoughts together, and I have, of course, what you're about to see. Now, before I get started, I would like to give everyone a heads up that this book does have quite a few explicit and detailed scenes regarding sexual depravity, animal death, and child death. So if these are subjects that you don't care to hear about, you might want to skip the spoiler section of this episode, as I will be discussing some of these subjects in detail. Otherwise, as far as the rest of the video is concerned, I'll try to discuss these subjects as politely and as delicately as I can for those who have a morbid curiosity. If you're a fan of Aron Beauregard, or if you're a fan of Playground in general, I have some good news, because as I was getting my ducks in a row for this review, I reached out to the author and asked if he could provide me with an interview for my segment known as The Story Behind the Story, which this is so you can learn a little bit of what inspired this author to create. In turn, he was kind enough to reply and say that he would answer my questions. So I would just like to take this opportunity to thank him for taking time out of his busy schedule, because I know he had many other important things to do than satisfy my curiosity. So I do very much appreciate that. On top of that, I do have some bragging rights because I have a signed copy of Playground. Like, check it out. Don't play too rough. Aron Beauregard. So flippin' cool. And if you would like to purchase a signed copy of this as well, I have a link available in the description section of this episode where you can reach out to the author and purchase a signed copy directly from him. Before I move on to what you can expect in regards to this book, I would just like to note that I buddy read this with my good online friend Nisa, which, of course, I would like to thank her for including me with her buddy read, and I just want to let her know I had a great time discussing the themes, the characters, and all of those disgusting and nauseating moments that just made us text each other back and forth with our jaws dropped and our eyes wide. So, Mr. Beauregard and Nisa, if y'all are watching this, I hope you enjoy this review. But without me rambling on any further, let's head off to Geraldine's castle, where 8 unlucky children and their families will be met with unspeakable horrors. Playground by Aron Beauregard introduces a hulking figure named Rock, who has been sent to gather 8 children and their families for a day that they'll never forget. And to accomplish this, he provides each family with a brochure that explains Geraldine Borden has plans to implement a state-of-the-art playground in the New England area for those who are in poverty, which, to make sure her vision is a success, she needs a few volunteers to test out her creations. Furthermore, to entice the families a little bit more, it explains that each household will be allotted $3,000 if they allow their children to participate. Well, since the brochure looks wholesome and the money is dearly needed, everyone agrees to the scheduled play date. Then, once they all arrive at their destination, they meet with Geraldine, who appears to be this sweet, lovely little grandmother. And to make everyone feel even more comfortable, Geraldine explains that she's part of a charity called Helping Hearts, which is supposedly an organization that contributes to homeless shelters and to food banks. But now they want to expand their generosity a step further, and their current goal is to provide children with the ultimate childhood experience with the playground that's featured in the brochures. Nonetheless, even though Geraldine seems like she's peaches and cream, some of the parents become apprehensive when they find out they're going to be separated from their children. So, to make sure everyone feels comfortable, she explains that it is important to watch the children at free range, and since separation seems to be an issue, she will allot each family an additional $1,000 for their cooperation. Which, after everyone agrees to her offer, all of the parents are taken to an observation room while their children are taken to a mock playground. Yet it isn't until the parents are restrained that they discover Geraldine is actually a sick and twisted pervert who has no limits to her depravity. In complete dread, the parents watch as their children are forced into a dungeon, which was created by Geraldine's assistant, Adolfo Fuchs, who, by the way, is actually an ex Nazi that was infamous for his crimes at the concentration camps. From here, as the children progress in a brutal environment, they're confronted with scenarios that combine the basic playground aesthetic with torture devices and games that are intended to eliminate its players. And as Geraldine hopes that this will produce a final girl or boy so she can groom them into being her successor, there's a very slim chance that anyone will survive what's in store. Now, for those of you who have been waiting, here are the answers that Mr. Beauregard provided me for the questions that I had regarding his book, Playground. Question number one: what inspired you to write Playground? Aron Beauregard said, oddly enough, my wife gave me the idea while we were driving. She just randomly asked me, what do you think the world's most dangerous playground would look like? Like if the person building it was intentionally trying to make it dangerous. Question number two. From a competitive angle, child exploitation is a big part of this book. Did you intend to bring awareness to this subject? Aron Beauregard answered, I don't think that was really something I thought about when writing it. I just wanted to tell an interesting story with relatable characters that people could root for or against. In a way, each of the children in the book represent a different aspect of my own childhood. The book is about looking back fondly on adolescence and remembering the good times still, no matter how bad things get. Question number three. While Playground has received a great deal of praise from lovers of extreme literature, it has become infamous on TikTok for readers tapping out only after a few chapters. Also, on the same platform, book talkers have called for Playground to be gelled. How do you respond to or feel about these reactions? Aron Beauregard explained, the challenge aspect has happened for a few of my books, The Slob, Yellow, Wet Market, Playground, etc., and I think it's great. It's interesting for readers, and when they find out that there's more to the book than just the repulsive parts, when they find out the story has heart, that's a wonderful thing. As far as people calling for the book to be jailed or for me to be killed or to kill myself, my question to those folks would be, do you not have anything better to do? Calling for someone's death because of a fictional story is about the dumbest shit I've ever heard. This is a minority group of extremists who typically don't have much going on in their own lives. Still, this has always been the case with any kind of art that gets recognition. I'm not bothered if people don't like my work. That's literally the point of it. My work appeals to an exclusive club, a group of amazing people who are not afraid of art pushing boundaries and who don't live their lives enslaved to what other people think. They are awesome spirits, never hampered by the haters. I focus on them, not the dumbasses. Question number four. In writing extreme literature, what obstacles have you encountered, and do you consider your writing to be extreme? Aron Beauregard explained, others have called it extreme. I believe the readers are the ones who decide, so I would say yes. Depending on the story, it can get very extreme. My biggest obstacle was figuring out how to do everything myself. Everything about my writing and publishing process is work I had to put in while working a soul crushing full time job. Now, I've been writing for 3 years full time, and I'm fortunate to be a success. Now, the biggest obstacle is keeping up with communications. Some days I get hundreds of messages and comments. It can be very overwhelming, but I'm doing my best to keep up to date. Question number 5. Who are some of the authors you read? Aron Beauregard replied, Edward Lee, Rath James White, Christopher Triana, Daniel Volpe, Jim Thompson, Bret Easton Ellis, and many more. With that covered, it's time to move on to the spoilers section, which, if you haven't read this book before, or if you have a weak stomach, you might want to avoid this upcoming segment. And to do that, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments where I have a pinned comment at the top. Inside that pinned comment, you'll see a timestamp. Once you click on that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So, ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about a few moments that stood out to me. First up is the human skateboard scene. Now, before this went down, the children entered Geraldine's chamber by descending a slide that was lined with razor blades. Shortly thereafter, one girl was killed by an explosion, and under another circumstance, a boy fell into some meat grinders after he was forced to play hopscotch on an elevated platform that had been made slippery with gore. Following their deaths, the remaining children are either forced to swing across a fire pit or utilize spring rides while trying to avoid swinging pendulums. Then, once they're beyond that point, they're forced to crawl across greased monkey bars that stretch over a pit filled with snakes and broken glass. After that, they arrive at a slide that they must utilize to access a lower level. But as simple as that sounds, the board is actually lined with spinning circular saws that rise up and lower every 4 seconds. Now, even though Isaac figures out the timing and multiple children are able to go down the slide while avoiding the saws, when it comes to be Sadie's turn, she hesitates. Meanwhile, as she's too afraid to go down, the pit that everyone had just conquered raises up to their level where poisonous snakes are released. And even though everyone is cheering Sadie on from the platform that they just arrived at, unfortunately, the group bully named Bobby is standing behind her. Well, since all of the parents have been granted a few seconds to advise their children what to do over an intercom, Bobby's competitive father Greg uses this opportunity to suggest to his son that his skateboarding skills can come in handy. And due to Bobby wanting his father's approval, he grabs Sadie by the ankle, which causes her to go face first into the slide. Then, after he stabs her multiple times, he stands on her back and rides her down while the saws mutilate her body. Y'all, even though I figured this was going to happen, seeing it unfold was still a kick in the ass. And I'm not going to lie, due to the description, the whole time that Bobby rode Sadie down, I gritted my teeth no differently than if someone was scraping their nails on a chalkboard. But with shock value aside, I do feel like the scene was necessary because it showed that Bobby and Greg would do whatever it took in order to win. And even though I feel like everyone already assumed that Bobby and Greg would play dirty, I feel like this just verified that there was no level to which they wouldn't stoop. Also, while I already hated Bobby and Greg with a passion, this was the moment that made me want to jump through the book and strangle the ever loving living shit out of them. Which, to be perfectly honest, the moment that they stepped on the page, I knew that they were capable of some shady shit. Even still, I did not realize that they were going to be this awful, and I have to admit that I totally underestimated them. The next WTF moment that stood out to me was the horror go round. So, leading up to this, after Bobby had rode Sadie like a skateboard, he got the big head because he made his father proud. Now, because of him having a boosted ego and a knife, he decided to take charge over the remaining survivors. From here, they all progress to the next level, and in order to advance further, they all have to ride on this old rickety merry-go-round that doesn't have any footing. Under that is a toxic moat. So, seeing as there's no other way around this, everyone loads onto the merry-go-round, and once they get into place, it starts to spin. Eventually, its speed picks up, and once its motion combines with the toxic fumes, everyone begins to feel its effects. Nonetheless, Bobby's able to muster the strength to pull out his knife and start cutting on Isaac's knuckles out of hopes that Isaac will fall into the moat. Which this is because Bobby has a vendetta against Isaac because he believes that his brother would still be alive today had it not been for Isaac moving as slow as what he did on the hopscotch platform. At this point, Isaac realizes he's going to die. However, he decides if he's going down, he's going to take Bobby with him because if he doesn't, Bobby's going to continue to bump everyone off for self-gain. So, with nothing to lose, Isaac grabs a hold of Bobby and they both fall into the moat where their skin and flesh melt off. Even still, their deaths are not quick because they flail about until their bodies simply give out. Y'all, even though I desperately wanted Bobby to die, I didn't think it was going to happen. Like, honestly, I thought he was going to be the sole survivor, where he was going to be forced into becoming Geraldine's successor because he was just that ruthless. Which, to be perfectly honest, I think becoming her successor would be a fate worse than death. But on the other hand, considering how Bobby was, I think that had he taken on that role, he had the potential to do some pretty awful things in his adulthood. While I felt like Isaac was going to die, I'm glad that he didn't die in vain and he took that asshole Bobby with him. Because I promise you, had Bobby lived, he would have killed off everyone else. The final moment I would like to talk about is the propeller scene. So, after the merry-go-round, the remaining three children continue forward, where they come to this huge seesaw that has a propeller overhead and a scoreboard off to the side. Which, after reading the rules, they discover that it's expected of them to seesaw to the count of 10. Upon succeeding, this will trigger a door that will allow them to continue to the next level. However, in order to trigger this, they have to seesaw high enough for the scoreboard to read their action. But at the same time, if they go too high, the propeller will kill them. With no other choice, CJ and Tanya take their seats, and as soon as they do, hooks latch into them so they can't escape. Then, as they perform what's expected of them, they bring the scoreboard up to 5. However, instead of continuing without there being any more issues, flames start to shoot up from beneath them, which causes them to move faster. From here, despite the amount of torment they're in, they're able to bring the scoreboard up to 9. Yet, even though they're this close to finishing, CJ passes out because of the pain. And while Tanya is trying to do everything within her power so they can both walk away, her end of the seesaw goes all the way down, which causes CJ's head to go up into the propeller. Even though I knew someone was going to die during this scene, I hoped I was wrong, because not only did I feel like CJ and Tanya made good leaders, they also made really great protectors. Aside from that, I love how they took Donnie in under their wing, and it felt like they had formed a tight bond with him, where they had become this family unit that was built over trauma. Now, with that said, when Nisa and I had started our read and we met all of the characters, we had a few different speculations of who would survive. And among those, we felt like Donnie could not be trusted. Like, even though Rock said that he and Donnie were kindred spirits, we were like, is Donnie actually good, or is he absolutely insane and he's going to win this because he's secretly a psychopath? Then, as we continued to read, I gradually let my guard down, and it wasn't until he saved Tanya that I realized we had totally misjudged him. So, after realizing Donnie was nothing more than a traumatized child, I feel like he meshed very well with CJ and Tanya, and I like to think that had all of them survived, they would have continued as a family unit. And even though I didn't receive that happy ending, I'm honestly not mad because before I started this book, I truly believed that there would be no survivors. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch. Now, while I could rant and rave about old micropenis Greg and his dumbass son Bobby because I felt like they were two obnoxious assholes who would age like milk, I had to remind myself we would not be in this predicament had it not been for that old perverted blue waffle known as Geraldine. So let me paint a picture here. This shit eater, and no, I'm not using that name as an insult because this nasty bitch reached her hand into the toilet and pulled out her mother's log and chowed down on it like it was a Mount Olive pickle while she beat the beaver. Anywho, as I was saying, this shit eater, when she was younger, she killed her own mother by sitting on the poor woman's face while she was on her deathbed. And yeah, the poor old lady, her last breath was in her daughter's vagina. Then later in life, this sick bitch ended up having Rock eat out her nasty ass cavern, which I say nasty ass, not trying to be an insult here, but the woman did not believe in cleaning downstairs. Like, Summer's Eve could have done wonders for the lady, but she was just all about her natural juices. Aside from Geraldine's sexual appetite making the Marquis de Sade look like a Thomas Kincaid painting, this nasty ass also was a child abuser, a murderess, a rapist, and she was friends with a Nazi. So, yeah, even though Rock beating the ever loving living shit out of her and sticking her hoo ha on a shard of glass did make me cross my legs, I was just totally happy that her pelt petting days were over. Playground by Aron Beauregard is like what would happen if Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory met Saw. And while a lot of people feel like this book has no redeeming qualities and it's nothing but shock value, Nisa and I felt like most of the characters were easy to root for, as well as there being some characters who we absolutely couldn't stand. Aside from that, we noticed where this book presented quite a few important themes, some of which included child exploitation, poor parenting, bullying, and teamwork. Character-wise, before I started my read, I knew this was an extreme horror novel, so I said to myself, Self, don't get attached to any of the characters because they're probably all gonna die anyway. Then, as I started my read, I noticed that there were a few characters who I felt sorry for, and there were quite a few who I rooted for. And out of everyone, I really enjoyed CJ and Tanya the most because they put people before themselves and they were good leaders. Also, I really did enjoy Isaac's character because while he was bullied and underestimated by a few of his competitors, without him, this book could have ended in a very different way. And while speaking about some of the children characters, it did take me a minute to warm up to Donnie, simply for the fact that I didn't trust him, which I covered that a little bit more in the spoilers section of this video. But aside from the characters who I did like, the author did throw a few bad apples into the mix, which among them we have Kip, Sadie, and Samantha, who felt like nothing more than your basic bully, and I think they had no other purpose to serve than to just be killed off. And to be honest, I am really not complaining about that because if your goal is to provide your reader with a body count, it makes sense that you would have a few characters who were expendable. Also, speaking about characters who were in that bad apple neck of the woods, Bobby was an absolutely horrible antagonist, and I loathed him with every fiber of my being. He was the worst out of all of the children bullies, and I wish I could elaborate a little bit more on him, but if I did, I would reveal some spoilers. As far as the adults were concerned, even though Rock was a background character who had little page time, as soon as he was introduced, he delivered this vibe that just made me feel sorry for him. Regardless, I still felt apprehensive until I received his backstory, and after I understood what he had been through, his final scene was very bittersweet for me. Other than him, I did feel sorry for the majority of the parents. However, Donnie's mother was an absolute piece of shit, and Greg was nothing more than an obnoxious jerk. And had I the power to jump through the pages of this book, I would have loved to have choked them out. Aside from them, Geraldine was an absolutely disgusting psychopath who got everything she deserved, and due to some of her actions, I will never be able to unsee some of the crap that she pulled. Theme-wise, Nisa and I noticed where this book primarily focused on child exploitation. And even though Mr. Beauregard said it wasn't his intent to focus on that subject, we noticed that it was presented in a few different ways. For example, the parents of this book used their children as a means to profit, as each household was allotted $3,000 if these parents would allow their children to participate in Geraldine's playday. Now, even though some of the parents felt apprehensive about being separated from their children, Geraldine offered them more money, and by doing so, this clouded their vision. Which this shows that not only does everyone have their price, but if you are a person who has been financially backed into a corner and you have suffered through poverty, you can easily ignore the red flags because you just think this is your only opportunity and it might not come again. And that's really, really sad. But overall, Nisa and I literally saw this being nothing more than a predator offering money for children and the parents complying. And yeah, the whole imagery that Geraldine had painted out for the parents was fairly positive. But even still, these parents were willing to accept money for their children. Aside from that, Nisa and I felt like child exploitation was also presented in a spectator sense. Like, Geraldine and Fuchs watched the children progress as a form of entertainment as she waited for a successor to rise. At the same time, despite Greg's children also being in danger, he watched everything with the same adrenaline rush that someone might have while watching the Super Bowl, which is really disturbing when you think about it because he really honestly just looked at his kids as being nothing more than potential trophy winners and not really caring about the lives that it destroyed. Next up, Nisa and I felt like this book presented the topic of poor parenting, and it showed how not everyone is fit to be a parent. For example, aside from all of the physical abuse that was done by Geraldine and Donnie's mother, we felt like Geraldine and Greg were similar because they both wanted to mold and groom a child to fit their expectations. Now, between the two, Greg wants to produce a sports superstar who will be everything he isn't, and Geraldine wants to produce a successor who will be just as sick and twisted as she is. And since none of the kids asked for either one of those roles, it shows that these parents don't have their best interest at heart. And if you are the kind of person who does not allow their child to be themselves and you want them to fit a specific mold that you have in mind for them, then you are going to be sadly disappointed in life and you probably shouldn't be a parent to start with. Another subject that we noticed regarded bullying. And while this is shown in a few different ways, I can't help but think that had Greg been a better father, then perhaps Bobby and Kip would have been more compassionate towards others. Which I say this because when a child isn't given the love that they deserve at home, a lot of times they'll lash out towards other children in an aggressive manner, which is exactly what happened here. And after seeing the type of person that Greg was, it made me completely understand why some of his children would be this way. Also, before I move on, I would like to point out that while Bobby and Kip were bullies towards other children, Greg was a bully towards other adults. And with that in mind, as I've said before, if you were a bully as a child, there's a slim chance you're ever going to change and you're just going to morph into an asshole adult. Which this could be a contributing factor for Bobby and Kip's personality, as Greg was not a positive role model whatsoever. Other than them, the characters of Sadie and Samantha, they just felt like your typical brat siblings, and they were nowhere near as bad as Bobby or Kip. And to be honest, I think this might just be showing us the basic sibling relationship. I'm honestly not certain because I was born as an only child. The last subject we noticed regarded teamwork. Now, out of the 8 children who went into the playground, only 2 of them survived. Nonetheless, as I was reading through the book, I noticed that the times when everyone worked together, they were met with more positive results than they were with negative results. And had it not been for Bobby making the choices that he did, at the very least, 5 children, himself included, could have easily left the playground had they just simply worked together. So, at the end of the day, keep in mind that teamwork makes the dream work. Overall, Playground did not scare me or creep me out. However, it was absolutely disgusting, and there was even one scene that made me gag, which I really have to tip my hat to this book for that reason because it takes a lot to really just get that going. And yeah, this this did the job. Playground by Aron Beauregard is the type of book that's intended for the well-seasoned fans of splatterpunk and extreme literature. So, if any of the subjects that I mentioned at the beginning of this book are things that you don't care to read about, then I highly recommend that you don't read this book because you will just be upset. And most of all, the author does not need any more hate mail. Otherwise, I feel like the author did a great job of providing me with characters who I rooted for, and I was really impressed with how creative he was in regards to the challenges that he presented. So, at the end of the day, if you are looking for a fast paced, gross out book that definitely falls into the subgenre of hagsploitation, then look no further, grab your barf bag, and read Playground. Now that we've arrived at the end of this video, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a certain profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll do that. Also, I do have a $10 tier available where for $10 a month, I'll still give you the shout out as you see here, but I do creepy photography on the side, so at the beginning of every month, I send out one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off and do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can continue to have a good time together. Also, if you would like to follow me on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you have not subscribed to my channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell as I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you have a great week and sweet nightmares.